and then we'll get started. Thank you for being here. Empire Community College, and I'm the Executive Director for the Mountain Empire Community College Foundation, which is hosting today's event. It is so wonderful to see everyone's faces here. This is actually the first time that we have had this event in person since COVID, and actually we had Mr. House as our guest in 2020. He told me right before we started that was the last event that he did before everything kind of shut down in 2020. So maybe it's very fitting that we have him back in 2023 to our area and to have our first in-person event in several years. So if you're here, I'm thankful for it. We're also live streaming today's event as well. So welcome everyone that's watching from afar on our Facebook channel and YouTube channel for the college. So before I begin today's program, I just want to thank a few people that have had a hand in today's event. First, the staff of our foundation who have organized and worked to make sure everything goes well today, and our MECC Foundation Cultural and Humanities Committee, chaired by Lena Grace, who's in the audience. Several of our Cultural and Humanities Committee members are here as well, so thank you for your help. I'd like to also thank the Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts Organization. They sponsor our part of our literary contest, and they have been an event sponsor since the inception of the festival. We are so grateful to them for their annual continued support of this event and many, many other things that go on in town, including the drama, the Trail of the Lonesome Pine drama, and the John Fox Jr. House. So, if you have tickets for the luncheon this afternoon, you're in for a treat. We'd like to thank the Fox House ladies for their work in preparing the luncheon for this afternoon. And hopefully, if you're there and you need directions, if you've never been before, just let us know after the event and we'll get you there. Most of all, I'd like to thank and congratulate the individuals who submitted entries for our short story and poetry contest. All of them are winners, And we had some amazing entries this year. It really blows my mind each year. We had so many entries, especially in the youth category. And so I thank the teachers who encourage students to be great writers and help them become great writers. It's really an amazing thing for our region. We need more voices speaking out about their experiences here growing up, and to encourage people to be able to write and write well what they think and feel. That's a wonderful skill set, no matter what career that you're going into. So there are copies, well, there were copies, I think you all have grabbed all of the copies that we had of the winning entries for today's event. If you'd like maybe to have a copy, if you're a winner, you'll get a copy with your certificate, so no worries. And if we need to make additional, we can do that. So it's a great honor to be part of this festival, which has for 47 years highlighted Appalachian writers, artists who are keeping our culture, our heritage, our language, and our traditions alive. Maybe like some of you, when I was young, all I wanted to be when I grew up was a writer. And, you know, I didn't know any writers. I didn't know what that meant, really. I just knew that that's something that I wanted to do. So to me, Appalachian authors, especially, are like celebrities among us. And I consider Mr. House among the very best. I first became aware of Silas House many years ago as I developed a love for Appalachian literature when I was in college. Growing up in Appalachia, and I grew up in the town of Appalachia, not just the region of Appalachia, but I remember watching that Hallmark series, Foxfire. Do any of y'all remember that? Well, it pained my heart to look that up on Google and find out that was produced in 1987. So if you remember that, then you're of my age group, I guess, and we're dating ourselves. So that movie had John Denver, Jessica Tandy, and Hume Crone. And I remember especially that it was the first time that I saw Appalachia depicted in the way that I knew it, where the movie evoked images of a range of emotions, a deep love for the area, sometimes anger, immense pride, and sometimes even sorrow. We had a copy of Foxfire at my house, and I soon learned that the book at my house was nothing like the movie, right? So that was not a novel. However, from that discovery, I started wanting to learn more about Appalachian literature, and I discovered there's a whole genre of books written about our region, right? I didn't know that when I was growing up. So that discovery opened up an entire new world for me, of a world of James Steele, Henry Cottle, Lee Smith, even John Fox Jr., Sharon McCrum, Barbara Kingsolver, Ron Rash, and many more. And Silas House was among those great writers. So I first heard him speak, I think in my 20s, when he was introducing one of my favorite bands from Kentucky. He was there on stage before the concert, and he was talking about his love of the mountains and the need to protect and preserve our natural resources, which is evident in his new novel, Lark Ascending. Several years ago, Silas became what I would describe as internet famous for one of his quotes, which was shared thousands and thousands of times on social media. And in fact, you know, if you want to, go out and find it today and share it, because I think it's a really good quote. This is just an excerpt of it, and I hope he'll repeat it and do a better job than I will. So the quote is, "Note to Appalachian young people, you don't have to lose your accent. You don't have to take it when people make fun of how you talk. If you choose to change it, that's okay. But no, you don't have to give up that part of yourself." So you see, Silas House speaks my language and our language. And because he says that my accent is okay, he's allowed me and so many others to believe that it is. He's an advocate for my people, our people, and he's an advocate for our home. I can't think of a more fitting guest speaker to celebrate our region's literary and cultural heritage at Mountain Empire Community College. So I thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoy this special event. At this time, I'm going to ask our Dean of Arts and Sciences here at Mountain Empire, Dr. Derek Wisman, to come up and do the introduction of Mr. House. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Greer. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm pleased to be able to introduce our special guest speaker, and I'd like to take just a few minutes and share with you his impressive biography, and it is impressive. Silas House is a nationally best-selling author of multiple novels, including Clay's Quilt, A Parchment of Leaves, The Coal Tattoo, Eli the Good, and Same Sun Here, which was co-authored with Neela Vashwani. His novel Southernmost was a long list finalist for the Carnegie Medal of Excellence in Fiction and appeared on several Best of 2018 lists, including The Advocate, Book List, Paste, Southern Living, Garden and Gun, and others. The book was given the Weatherford Award, as well as the Judy Gaines Young Award. He has published 3 plays and a book of creative nonfiction called Something's Rising, co-authored with Jason Howard in 2009. His newest novel, Lark Ascending, was released last fall and was named a Southern Book Prize finalist, an Editor's Choice of 2022 selection, a Salon's Favorite Books of 2022 selection, and the Garden and Gun's Best Southern Books of 2022 selection. Mr. House is a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers, the recipient of 3 honorary doctorates, and is a winner of a host of awards, including the Nautilus Award, an E.B. White Award, the Storylines Prize, the Lee Smith Award, and the Appalachian Book of the Year. His writings have appeared in publications such as Time, The Atlantic, The Advocate, Garden and Gun, and Oxford American. He has served on the fiction faculty at Spalding University and as the National Endowment for Humanities Chair at Berea College. Additional credits include his time as a commentator on NPR, hosting a popular podcast called On the Porch, and his experience as a music journalist, where he worked with artists such as Casey Musgraves, Chris Christopherson, Lucinda Williams, Leanne Womack, and many others. Mr. House was an executive producer and one of the subjects of the documentary Hillbilly, which is now available on Hulu. The film won the Audience Award from the Los Angeles Film Festival and the Media Award from the Foreign Press Association. He was the recipient of the prestigious 2020 Governor's Award for his service to the arts in his home state of Kentucky. In an interview about that award, Mr. House had the following to say, and I think it quite well sums up the importance of developing art and literature. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "I know many people, including myself, who have survived as outsiders because of novels, music, films, poetry, and painting. The arts literally save lives, so it doesn't get any more important than that. I love the line in the old song that says, 'Give us bread, but give us roses,' because as much as we need food for sustenance, we also need beauty. Art always reveals the truth, and there are few things more important than that." So please, at this time, please help me to give a warm Southwest Virginia welcome to Mr. Silas House.
Good morning. Thank y'all so much for being here. I have a little technology to share with you. I'm thankful to Amy Greer for bringing me back to Mountain Empire. It's always great to be here, and it's great to see some friends in the audience. I hope we'll get to visit some more today. Let's see if I can work this. I want to talk to you a little bit about my latest novel, Lark Ascending. And I have learned after 22 years of being a published author to either have a musician or some slides with me. And that always makes my presentation better. And I really like having slides because it allows you to have something else to look at besides me. And so I hope I can work it correctly. Yes. So the first thing I want you to know about Lark Ascending is that it is a novel born of grief. This is a picture of me and my aunt. Her name was Thelma, but I called her Sis. And I'm really lucky because I have 2 wonderful parents. I have a wonderful mother and father. but my aunt, Sis, lived right next door, and so I felt like I had a third parent, a bonus parent. And this is my favorite picture, even though you can't really see her, but I love the way her hand is on my shoulder. And this epitomizes our relationship because she was always guiding me and teaching me, and she was always adoring me, and I adored her in return. And she was just always, she was the first person to buy me a guitar. She bought me my first typewriter. She bought me my first books, all three of those things at yard sales. And so she was just always encouraging me in every way. And this is a picture of her taken about the summer before she passed away. And so in 2015, we lost her unexpectedly. She was 79. And I was just absolutely gutted by her death. I had never lost anybody that close to me before. And I didn't understand profound grief. And until you go through it, you just can't understand it until you go through it. And when it happens, there's a before and there's an after. And so it took me a long time to work through that. I'm still working through it. It's been 8 years now. A friend of mine, Allison Moore, the great musician, she says, grief never leaves us, it just changes shape, but it always has its teeth in you. And I think that's one of the truest things I've ever read. To make all of this more complicated, the day after we buried her, I had to get on a plane and fly to Ireland because I was under contract to be a writer in residence at the National University of Ireland at Galway. And I was brought in especially because they had started the Gene Ritchie lecture series there. And many of you probably know Gene Ritchie is a great writer, songwriter, musician from Eastern Kentucky. And one of the things she did was do a lot of research on the connections between Appalachia and Ireland. And so in Ireland, she's just, incredibly well respected. And Irish people know who Gene Ritchie is, maybe more than American people do. And so I did the inaugural Gene Ritchie lecture there. And so it was like 2 weeks of workshops and lectures and dinners with students and lunches with faculty. And looking back on that, I must have just been like a zombie, sort of like floating through it. Yeah, I have very little recollection of it. I was just phoning it in. I was doing my job, but my whole heart wasn't there. My heart was back home with my family, because it was really hard to leave my family in that deep grief and to leave everything that was familiar to me. And so the only thing that really got me through that was when my responsibilities were finished every day, I was able to go on these long walks in the Irish countryside. And it was, you can be in the countryside very quickly, even when you're in a place like Galway in Ireland. And they don't think of trespassing the way we do. You can just walk wherever you want to. And so I would just go for walks for hours and try to work through that grief the best way I could. Here's a picture of me during that time. And on one of those walks, I was walking along and this little dog came out between this rock fence. It was sort of a little gap. He just hopped over it and he joined me on this walk for a couple of miles. And at one point, I sat down and he let me pet him. And if you've ever had much of a relationship with dogs, you know that sometimes you'll have this like one-on-one conversation where they look you right in the eye, and there's a connection that happens. And that happened between me and this little dog. And then he decided he was going back where he had come from, and he went back down the path. And I document a lot. For my writing research, I use my camera a lot. I take a lot of pictures when I don't have time to write stuff down, I'll just snap pictures. And I thought, I'm going to get a quick picture of him before he leaves. And he was going away, and just as I brought the camera up, he turned around and looked at me. It was like he was posing for this goodbye picture. So I'm lucky to have this little picture of him. He's important to this novel, and I'll come back to him. When I got home, I kept thinking about those walks, and I kept thinking about Ireland and that dog, and I kept having the image of a younger man than me and this dog walking across Ireland, and I knew that I wanted to write a novel about that, but I didn't know what the novel would be. I knew that it would be about grief, and I knew the main character and the dog would be carrying an intense grief. And it would be a way for me to keep working through that grief. And so as I began to write, just one thing led to another. It was very organic. At the same time, I was processing this real personal grief. I was also going through what I would think of as a collective grief. I started writing this novel around the last of 2015, really got into it in 2016, 2017. And so I felt part of a collective grief in that I felt like I was losing my country, in that the country everything seemed so divided, and everything was so vitriolic, and there were so many waves of sadness that just kept coming, one after another. Whether that was because of political divides, or because of mass shootings, or then there was the pandemic, which was its own new kind of sadness that we all had to learn how to get through. And so that whole time I was using all that to write this novel, and eventually I had a story. And so in the story, I center on one family, an Appalachian family, even though the book is, many people think it's the farthest I've ever gotten away from Appalachia, but at its core is an Appalachian family. No matter where I go in my writing, it's always through the point of view of an Appalachian person. So my last novel, Southernmost, is mostly set in Key West, but it's through the eyes of an Appalachian man. And this novel is mostly set in Ireland, but it's through the point of view of an Appalachian man. And so this family lives in Appalachia, and the strangest thing about this book that I still can't really believe that I wrote is that it's set about 20 years in the future. And when I think of my writing, I don't think of like ever setting anything 20 years in the future. I'm so interested in the past and the present. I'm not really interested in that. I've never been a science fiction reader or anything like that. But the nature of this book meant that it had to be set about 20 years in the future. You'll see when you read the book that my version of the future is not flying cars and all this advanced technology. It's more like the far past, because it's post-catastrophe. And so there's no electricity. People are living in really small communities just trying to survive together. So it's more like the 1800s than it would be the way people think of the future. And so, being an Appalachian family, I feel like we have the upper hand on survival. In The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, when that book starts, she makes mention of the only Americans still fighting back are the Appalachian people. And so I sort of took that little kernel, and that's what's going on here. This Appalachian family is, they're still surviving in a time of climate catastrophe and famine and war. And so they are living right here where that little star is on the Maryland-West Virginia border. It's called Backbone Mountain. And I picked it mostly because of its location, its proximity to being able to move, because this is a novel where they're always in motion, they're always journeying, but also because it's a really pristine part of Appalachia and a really isolated part of Appalachia. So there's a little view of Backbone Mountain on the Maryland-West Virginia border. And so when I started thinking about what was going to happen in my version of the future, I was thinking a lot about climate change, and I looked at a lot of different projections of what might happen. And one of those projections is forest fires. And that made a lot of sense to me because when I started writing the novel, Australia was burning. And y'all probably remember that incredible fire. And there's one report that says 1 billion animals perished in that fire, which is just, I couldn't stop thinking about that and how incredibly devastating that fire was. And so I thought if something like that happened in the United States and how it would sort of be a domino effect, it would lead to famine because the crops would burn too. And that would lead to war, and that would lead to the rise of, in my scenario, fascism. And so the government falls, and the fires are creeping closer, and the fires are moving up to the northeast. And so this family has to leave central Appalachia, and they walk up the Appalachian Mountains to Maine to this place called the Bigelow Preserve. And this is right off of the Appalachian Trail, and this family knows about it because they've hiked the Appalachian Trail. So here's some views of the Bigelow Preserve, and I picked it because it's just one of the most pristine places and a place where you could survive for a long time if you knew how to forage and use the land as this family knows how to do. As you can see, it's such a beautiful place. It's a place full of lakes and ponds, fresh water being really important, lots of vegetation that they can eat, and lots of waterfalls. If you've read the novel, you probably know that waterfalls are important in it. And if you've seen the cover, as you did earlier, you know that waterfalls are important in it. So there's a waterfall that's really important in Maine and a waterfall that's important in Ireland. And the cover sort of incorporates both of those. And so I'm going to read you just a short little scene about their time living there in the mountains. If I can find my page numbers here. Those were holy years, our time in Maine. I knew that even then. Sarah, Arlo, and I were content despite the hardships the country was going through. We were children. We had our own world from the ponds and streams. I helped my parents in the garden with the beets, carrots, cabbages, potatoes, kale, turnips, parsnips. Arlo cut and stacked wood or built things we needed, a trellis, rocks beneath where we could stand and let the water massage us, but parts of the pool were deep enough to dive into as well. We'd whoop and holler. We'd stand for a long time under the falls, letting its water flow over our heads and bodies. We dove and swam and floated. My mother and Phoebe laid back on the mossy rocks, relaxing. My father splashed with us. He dived and swam while we did. We were about as free and happy as people could possibly be back then. But eventually the forest fires catch up with them because they're devouring the whole country. So here's a short little scene where you see that happen. The fires came to us. We watched them getting closer for a week, easing up on either side of the lake. Once the fire jumped the river, we knew we'd have to leave. A sadness like that latches itself around your neck. We all carried it with us as we chose what to take with us, as we said goodbye to the place that had protected us so well. Arlo ran his hands down the trunk of the cedar tree and then held his scented fingers to my and Sarah's faces. If we had to carry the grief, we might as well take some of the beauty with it. There was always room for that. But we left it all to burn, all of the cedars, all of the trees, the nest of whippoorwills and owls, our cabin. Sometimes I still lie awake at night, imagining what happened to all the things we had loved, the blackened walls of our cave, the charred remains of those trees we had known so well. I guess the only thing that remains are the rocks and the water, the river, the creeks, the falls, singing along in a barren landscape. The water doesn't know. At the river, we were joined by a dozen strapping deer, their ears flicking toward the fire as they wondered what would happen next. And I was just thinking about how, as Americans, we read about this and we're sad about it, but ultimately we feel like we're pretty helpless in matters like this, and we don't know what we can really do to help people. I think most of us are good people who really want to help, but often there's nothing we can do, and we feel like our hands are tied. And so I wanted to write a novel in which Americans were the refugees, to put us in those boats and sort of flip the script in that way, in that sort of national conversation. And so the book actually opens with that, and then you go back and learn everything that's led up to that moment. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the opening. What I recall best is the noise, the thrashing of heavy sprays, the thundering of the sails, the shrill cries of the crew, the suffering of the seasick. I was ill the entire first week of the crossing. Most everyone was. All of us hanging off the sides of the boat, moaning and retching. I've never known such misery, despite what I've been through since. I have had many adventures in my life, but there is no matching that anguished time. There's pain and suffering, and then there's misery, which is what we lived while we crossed the ocean. I wasn't just seasick. I was undone in sorrow. Only days before, we had been a family of 6, and now we were only 3. Sometimes, though, there were interludes where there was nothing but the sound of water slapping against the boat. Everyone was either asleep or silent in their misery, and there would be a kind of peace for a time. I would open my eyes and look out at the aching blue of the ocean, a color I had never seen in nature and that most likely only exists in the middle of the Atlantic, a blue like a storm cloud full of unspent lightning and unfallen rain. There was some comfort in knowing that although the world was being torn in two, there were still remarkable things that went on being, that refused to lose their shine. Some days it was only the wonder that kept us going. And so when you're writing a book like this, it's about grief and violence and war and disaster. You have to find these moments of beauty like this. You have to find the moments of wonder and hope. And I really what I was trying to do was write a book where it seemed like the world was ending, but the main character never loses hope and never loses his sense of wonder, and he never loses his humanity. And so I had to often put myself in scenarios of, if you're trying to survive, how do you do that? How do you retain your humanity in a crisis like this? And so what I really did was try to latch on to the thing I've always used to survive, which is the natural world, and to explore both the violence and the beauty in the natural world. I have been to all the places that I'm writing about in the book, Appalachia, Ireland. I've never been on a crowded refugee boat in the middle of the Atlantic, thankfully. And so I had to do a lot of research, and I had to really think a lot about, I had to try to put myself in that boat. The only way that I really knew to do that was to look at photographs and videos and things like that. One thing that really helped me, strangely enough, was to look at paintings of the ocean. Somehow, even better than looking at a video, a painting conjured the violence and the beauty of the ocean to me. And so I spent a lot of time actually with paintings in museums doing that, looking at them very closely, spending time with them so that I could try to capture that as much as I could. So eventually, they make it across the Atlantic, but a little bit of a spoiler, the only person who actually makes it ashore in Ireland is the lead character, Lark. He loses everybody. He loses his whole family. He loses the love of his life. And so he is in the most profound grief that you can be in. But he makes it to this little island off the coast of Ireland. It's called Sherkin Island. It's an island I know really well. One of my best friends is married to an Irish woman. He is a rector in the Episcopal Church, and they live here now, but she kept her house there in Ireland. Only 50 people live on this island. And so because she has that house there, I'm able to go there and spend time there and really get to know the flora and the fauna and the ocean and then the place and the people in a really intimate way. And so when he first arrives, this is where he arrives. And not long after that, he meets a dog. So you remember the dog that I met in Ireland? He was a sheepdog. So when I first started writing the novel, I'm trying to write about that dog that befriended me in Ireland. And I just didn't know, I'd never had a sheepdog, but I associated that dog so much with this book. I thought that has to be him. And also, I just associate sheepdogs with Ireland. I don't associate beagles with Ireland. I don't know why. It's just like, media attaches certain things, right? But a friend of mine has sheepdogs, and I was just worrying her to death. I was calling her all the time saying, tell me this about a sheepdog, and how does a sheepdog do that? How does your sheepdog react to this and this and this? And finally, she's a very patient but firm person, and she said, Silas, you have a perfectly good beagle you could be writing this book about instead of my sheepdogs. And on one hand, she was freeing me, but on the other hand, she was freeing herself, I guess. And so I said, yeah, but I just don't think a beagle's been in Ireland. And so I called my friend Audrey, who's from Sherkin Island. And I said, as somebody who lived in Ireland 35 years, did you see, were beagles common? She said, oh, we had loads of beagles. And so that gave me all the permission I needed. And so I started writing about my dog, Ari. And I write on a couch usually. I have a little love seat in my writing room, or I write on a little bench on the porch as much as I can right outside. But in either case, he's always right beside me. He's lying beside me, and often his big old velvety ear will creep right onto the keyboard, and I'll have to move it to keep typing, So he is really in this novel, and I just studied him so much to write this novel. And so there are very few dogs left in the world because things aren't good, and I won't go into too much detail about why that is. But Lark is very surprised to find a dog hiding out in the woods of Ireland. And so when he does, eventually we go back and we get the dog's story. The dog is named Seamus. And so here you get his story, and you realize that he is also carrying a profound grief. So this is a little longer section that I'll read to you. Even as a puppy, Seamus roamed free on the island. Every day he awoke at his place beside the old man's bed and trotted down the hallway, across the kitchen, and to the door which the old man would open for him. Once outside, he yawned and stretched in the morning sun, took in a deep breath of the salt air, and eyed the sky. Usually some gulls were frolicking about, and he ran out into the field below to chase them, even though he knew he could not jump high enough to snatch them. Oh, but he would love to. Those old gulls had a grand time making fun of him because he couldn't fly like they could. They always wheeled away over the sea, laughing at him. Then he would meander down to the fields to aggravate the cows for a while, but he quickly grew bored of them, and he'd go to the beach. Very often there were dead fish that made for a nice long sniffing, but he'd lose interest within a few minutes. Sometimes there were colored bottles that made a nice music if he pushed them around. A few times there had been shoes that had washed ashore. He liked to chew on them. There were lobsters, starfish, beach balls sometimes, usually flattened. Once, a baby doll with a dress and bonnet. He had a great time tearing that up. The best things, however, were the sticks. Even the bigger ones were light and easy to carry. Once he had struggled home with a piece twice as long as him and dropped it on the porch with a plump that made the old man laugh. Seamus usually went back to find the old man up and offering him breakfast. He lay down for a time near his man's feet while the man read the morning papers. Later, they'd work in the garden together, sometimes take a nap. By the time the night rolled across the water, Seamus was served his bowl of supper while the old man ate his at the table. They watched some TV together, and when the nighttime was easing in, they always went out onto the stoop, where his man had his one cigarette of the day and scratched Seamus's head as they watched the moon drift over the water. Every single night, the old man got down onto his knees beside the bed and folded his hands and bowed his head. His lips moved, and Seamus knew to be still there beside him until he had said the word, Amen, which always made Seamus's ears go up because he knew now he would get attention again. As long as he knew, Seamus had always lived here with the old man who was very good to him. Nobody ever came to see them. The skies turned to tarnished silver, and cold wind blew up from the sea. The old man stood looking out across the water and listened to the radio all the time. The electricity blinked out of being, but he had a radio that he wound up with a skinny handle and listened to with his ear close to the speaker. Now, Seamus was allowed to sleep in the bed with his old man at night. They lay curled up together. Then he didn't get his bowl of food anymore, only what the old man brought from the garden, and this was usually only potatoes, and more they were rotten. Every day there was less. His old man became very thin and pale. His hair stood in wisps of cottony white. He lay in the bed and coughed. He ate the last of the potatoes. There were no more single cigarettes on the stoop in the evening. No longer did his old man read aloud to him. When he was still able, the old man propped the door open, even though the cold came in. Do not leave until you have to, he said, pointing to the door. Do you understand, Seamus? Seamus tilted his head. Only when you have to. Do you hear me? Seamus heard, but he didn't know what this meant. One morning he awoke, and the old man did not. Seamus looked at his face for a time, but still the old man did not move. He nudged at the man's hand, and then his nose with his own wet nose. Yet the old man was as still as a piece of the driftwood. Seamus lay atop his old man's chest and looked at him for a long time. He whined. The day passed, and at night he slept. Another day, he awoke, aching with hunger, but did not want to leave his old man. So he lay there through the next night and another. He watched the shadows of twilight overtake the room, breathing into the corners. The sun awoke him, and the island was very quiet. He had to perk up his ears to hear the crash of the waves. Seamus went to the cupboard and nosed open the door. Empty. He went to the door and poked his head out, looked around. All silence. There was not so much as the chattering of a gull, as if the cows and birds had left now too, like the people had done on the boats months ago. He went back and lay down with his man for many hours, and then, by cover of night, he went to the door, paused for 1 second, and then he trotted out into the great world. And so, obviously, things aren't as good in Ireland as Lark and his family had hoped they would be. Ireland has suffered just like America has, even though the forest fires haven't come to them, but the war has. And so Ireland is not a safe place. But Lark forms this, at least he's starting to form a little family, first with Seamus, and later with a mysterious woman named Helen that he meets. But here is the landscape that they're moving through. And this is all, I walked the entire route that Lark walks. Not just the the first time that I was there, but I walked it in increments over several times that I was in Ireland. Do I need that back? Yeah. Sorry. I don't know if, do I need both of them? Or just that one? Can you hear me okay? All right. But this is some of the scenery I saw along the way. Most of these are not my pictures. But he's moving through an mostly abandoned Ireland. This is the sort of view I was thinking of most of the time, a really moody, incredibly beautiful place, an ancient place. And so along the way, he is walking with with this woman, Helen. He doesn't know if he can quite trust her or not, but he knows that they have a connection, and she too is in deep grief. She's lost a child that she's looking for. And so I'm just going to read you a quick little scene of the two of them. She's the main Irish character. I will not attempt to do her Irish accent because I can't do it good enough, which is why an actor did the audio book, because he's really good at the Irish accent. But in this scene, she will also speak a little bit of Irish, so you'll hear that. Onward, walking, walking, for miles and hours, into the purpling of evening, the gloaming, Helen announced. And I wondered how the world had known in all this time to start its way toward nighttime without Helen around to speak it into being. Why do you call it that? I asked her. She was balancing herself with her arms out as we crossed a jagged line of stones across a quickening stream. What would you have me call it instead? She said. Dusk, twilight, I answered, watching the cliffs above us. But the word gloaming is so much lovelier, she said, as if that was the end. Tall pines loomed all around us, fragrant with sweetness. And then we came out into a clearing where we could see the silhouette of mountains against the darkening sky. The mountains lounged against one another in various states of repose. Several starlings arose from an ash tree atop the wooded hill before us. At least 100 fluttered skyward. They all moved together as if they could predict each other's movement. They swooped down and up and in a spiral, an undulation, dozens of birds moving as if they were of one mind. I had seen this happen before, but it always felt like a kind of magic. A murmuration, Helen called it. That's a good word too, I said. Did you make that up? No, Helen said. I collect good words. Where do you find them? Everywhere, she said, and then added, I was a teacher once in a Gael school. What's that? A school where you're only to speak Irish before the Britons took over again. Why didn't you tell me you had been a teacher? You never asked, she said, with an air of annoyance. What were you before you were a refugee? I had always felt so at home in the Maine woods that I had never even thought about how we had really been refugees there too, hiding out. Ever since I've been a child, we've just been trying to survive, I said. By now we had reached the large ash tree, and the birds had spun away in one rippling mass over the far pastures where the last light was leaving the western sky. We stopped there, beneath the tree, and 2 hazel trees grew beneath it. What is a murmuration in Irish? I asked. Ealta, she said, then took hold of one of the slender limbs that had grown up in a bramble around the older, thicker branches of the hazel. And this is Cull. And so I'm alluding to a lot of Irish folklore there, and especially Yeats. You know, Yeats alluded to hazel wands and little silver trout. Some of you probably know the tale of the Wandering Angus, so I'm often alluding to that, the song of the Wandering Angus. So you hear some of that throughout. And so they are aiming for a settlement, an ancient settlement. It's called Glendalough. Have any of you been to Glendalough? It's in Ireland. It's about a half an hour south of Dublin. If you go to Ireland, go to Glendalough. It has been a settlement since the 7th century. A man named Kevin decided that he would go to this place because he thought it was the most beautiful place he'd ever been, and he would pray for 7 years without ceasing. And so legend has it that he did that. And so after the legend of who he eventually became Saint Kevin, that grew and it became a pilgrimage place for the Christian world for centuries, for many centuries. People from all over Europe would make pilgrimages to Glendalough. Today, it is known as a holy place and a thin place, Thin, meaning a place where the veil is thinner between the natural world and the supernatural world. Some people say it's because people have been praying there since the 7th century, and that's made it a thin place. Some people say that he was attracted to it because it was already a thin place before he got there and started praying, maybe because of mineral deposits or magnetic fields, or who knows why a thin place is a thin place. But most of us have experienced a thin place. They often happen at confluences, and there's a confluence here as well. And so this family, Lark's family, has heard this is a safe place, and it's a place where, like-minded people are starting to rebuild a community. And so that's where Helen and Lark and Seamus are aiming. And once there, they encounter this waterfall, which of course is incorporated on the cover of the book, along with the main waterfall. And so before I turn it over to you all, because I hope we can have a conversation about all of this and more, I'm going to read just one more little section. For me, writing a novel is a really selfish act because I feel like I gain so much from the experience, and I only know that the book is finished when I feel like I have gained something. And in this case, the novel helped me to get a handle on the grief, and it helped me through the grief. It carried me through. The only way I've ever survived anything is through writing, reading, the natural world, and dogs. And so all of that is in this book. So this book is like everything I know about survival. I also learned a whole lot about foraging and things like that to write this book. But this passage I'm going to read to you, when I wrote it, is when I realized that this is what I had been writing this whole novel to get to this realization. So this happens towards the end of the book, but it doesn't give anything away. It's not a spoiler in any way. And it has sort of become the takeaway internet-wise, which, a lot of stuff is measured by nowadays. The internet has embraced this quote. It gets shared a lot, and so you'll hear it in this little passage. I've burned, and that's what I wish for all of you, to burn with anger, desire, joy, sorrow, all of it. There were days of hunger and misery. There were days of starting all over. We did not give up. We lived. We were survivors. There were days of celebration and mourning, times of quiet and fire, of low storm clouds and skies so blue they stirred up that ache of melancholy that comes with witnessing beauty. Days of simply surviving, but always there were days of wonder. I have been through many hardships, just like all of us, but most days the grief is balanced out by the pleasure, a delicious meal, the smell of cedar, the sound of rushing water, good friends, a child. Joy and sorrow are the things of life, the two things always tangled. Anybody who's ever lost anyone knows that. And so I think my realization there was, it's a simple thing, but when you are mired in grief, it's a hard thing to see sometimes, that you finally get to the place in your grief where you start to realize that the grief is so big because the love was so big. And so then you start focusing more on the love than the grief. And that, that gives you a balance, that gives you a way to survive and push through. And so, something in me knew that because it came out of my fingers into the laptop, right? But I didn't fully know it until it came out onto the page. That's just the way, I don't know, that's the way I work as a writer and as a human being, and I can't separate the two things, my being a person and my being a writer. And so in that way, the book was a real balm for me, and I hope that it can be a balm for other people too. So thank you all for listening. We have a few minutes for conversation. So what do y'all want to talk about? It always takes just a minute, and then they start coming. Thank you, sir. Yes. What didn't carry over? I thought more about what did carry over. You know, I mean, of course, you know, there are, I think the main thing is the essential things carried over into the culture I grew up in. Now that I am a professor and I'm the chair of Appalachian Studies at Berea College, and so having done a lot of research and into Appalachian culture and things like that, I now realize that Appalachian culture is a braid of three cultures, right? It's a braid of Native culture, African culture, and Scots-Irish culture. And you can see that in the agriculture, in the music, in the foodways, in the crafts tradition. I mean, you can see it just everywhere. Excuse me. So I say that just to say that right now I'm going to focus on the Scots-Irish part of it. And I think, you know, being from the community I was raised in, it focused a lot on the Scots-Irish traditions. And so when I first went to Ireland, one of the first things that struck me when I went to a restaurant, and you go in and there's a host, you know, who welcomes you, a hostess welcomes you in to the restaurant and takes you to seat you. As soon as I went in the door, there was a woman, first time I went into a restaurant, there was a woman standing there and she had menus and she said, "How are ye?" And that's exactly what that was the first thing my granny would say when I walk in, you know, and so it was just like this big wave of, I don't know, familiarity and nostalgia, and it was just, I felt really moved by it when she said that. And then shortly thereafter, I was in conversation with an Irish person who said something about somebody being queer. And that's not something you hear in like America outside of Appalachia. And even a lot of Appalachian people now don't know that word, but I mean, I was raised hearing that word a lot. Or I heard somebody say "carn" in Ireland, and that is a very specific word to Appalachia when you're in the United States, you know, but it's something that Irish people still say. And so I think hearing those words that mark me when I'm out away from home as being the other, it made me feel so comfortable in Ireland to hear those words being said, you know, just in everyday conversation. I think the sense of hospitality and like just making sure that your visitors, your guests are treated a particular way. You know, there's so much emphasis on hospitality that's similar to the way I was raised. Things like that. Of course, you know, the importance of music in social settings, the way stories are told. There's just so much that felt familiar to me in that way. I guess, you know, depending on where you are in Ireland, there's a different experience with troubles and the way that feels real present or not, you know. And we wouldn't feel that, of course, as much in Appalachia, but in some ways it is similar that, like the west of Ireland feels very much like Appalachia because the west is where the language has survived the longest and the traditions have survived, in the way that Appalachia is sort of a repository for the rest of America in that way, you know? So there are just so many layers to it, I think. Yes. What else? Yes.
Always thinking about something to eat, and
Me too.
and I also heard you talk about fiddleheads. Have you eaten fiddleheads?
I have.
You like them?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Do you?
It's time to go get some.
Right. Yes.
They're out right now, and Morel hickory chickens. Morel.
Yes.
They've got so many names. Anyway.
I had supper at this gentleman's house one time, and he went out to the creek and gathered some watercress and put in our salad. I always remember that. It was so good. Yes.
My son-in-law says that anybody that puts a leaf on of sage on their sausage when they fry it, they're real country.
Right.
Anyway, so you're foraging. Do you practice that still?
I mean, it's not something I do a lot, but, you know, if I see some poke, I know how to prepare that. I was raised, we were raised eating poke salad, and ramps wasn't really a part of where I grew up as much as I think some other parts of Appalachia, but it's something that, that I've gathered and eaten, and, things. It was mostly greens, stuff like greens stuff that I grew up foraging that my family used. But I learned a lot more about it writing the novel, because they had so little to eat. They had to learn how to use anything. And where I'm from, morels is a big thing, gathering morels. We call them dryland fish when I was growing up. So I think that's had a real resurgence. A lot of young people, like I said, I teach at Berea College, and a lot of my students will go out and gather morels. So I love seeing that, So I think there is a resurgence of that sort of thing. There's a big book out right now called Forager. I don't know if y'all have seen it. It's really new. That's all about that.
Good survival skills.
Yeah, yes. Yes, back here.
The captain of the boat and your mother, was that drawn from your Aunt Sissy or your Aunt Sis?
Well, I just I am often thinking of a woman telling a story to me because in my family the women were storytellers.
Yes.
And the women in my family were really strong women. The women in my community, I mean, my experience of women is more of a fierceness and a strength, and so my female characters tend to be that way. I don't have a lot of fainting daisies in my novels, just because that wasn't my experience. And you're referencing the captain, right? You said the captain.
Right.
I was often thinking in this novel about what we expect a man to have certain roles, and so often I would put women in those roles because, for one thing, I'm thinking, of the future, but I'm also thinking about in a world of survival, and people are doing what they're good at and things like that. So I really love that captain. I'm glad you noticed her in the book. She's not in it very long, but when she's in it, she has an important role to play. She's always praying, for instance, and he wonders who she's praying to. Even though that novel's called Clay's Quilt, people tend to think they talk to me more about Easter, his aunt, than they do Clay. So I think a big part of that is just growing up around female storytellers and just strong women. I think Appalachia is a very matriarchal place. I think the stereotype of Appalachia is that it's very patriarchal, but that's not been my experience of it.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and ask a question too. So you were talking about how young women, especially Appalachian women, have a fierceness, or women in Appalachia have a fierceness to them. And there's several young women out in the audience today who are writers and who will be receiving awards for their writing. How would you encourage women, I guess, or young women in this area to develop that fierceness? how did you develop the ability to communicate and see and, I guess, express the fierceness of the people around you?
That's a great question. I think the main thing that comes to mind to me is to find the encouragers. You know, I was really lucky to have a lot of people in my life who encouraged me to be a writer. But I also had my antenna up to find those people too. Like I found the teachers who were the most generous and were going to, go the extra mile. And I found people who loved literature and things like that. So if you think that there's not a community out there for you, there is. Sometimes you have to find it. I was lucky that a lot of that was given to me through my family. I wasn't raised in a family of readers at all. They only read the Bible, that was it. But they had a deep respect for literature and art, and they encouraged that in me. My parents were really worried, like how are you going to make a living, as a writer? You need to get a job at the factory and write. And that's what I did. I became a mail carrier, and it was the best thing I could have done. I found a job that allowed me to write. I had a degree. I could have gone into teaching English right out of college, but I would have disappeared into that. Our public school teachers have way too much on them, and people expect school teachers to raise their children nowadays. It drives me crazy, and plus all the paperwork they put on them. But I knew enough to find a job that I would be able to leave at the end of the day and go home and write. And I was lucky to have people around me to support me. So find the supporters, I guess, is the best advice I have. I know that's simple, but it really makes a big difference to find those people who can encourage you and support you. And if you, if you're in love with somebody who's not supporting you as an artist and you're an artist, then get away from them. You have to have people, the people who love you have to love you for who you are completely. What else? I'm not trying to break up any relationships here, but.
I have a question, actually. What do you see your legacy being?
Lord of mercy.
Because I would say, as a reader of Appalachian fiction, that you're probably one of the true Appalachian authors that live, breathe, work here. So what do you want your legacy to be?
I think the main thing I like for my legacy would be to be thought of as multifaceted. I don't like the way Appalachia is always seen as a monolith. I think that the Appalachian people I know contain multitudes, and we're really eclectic, and there's a lot of things going on with us. We're not just one thing. Also, I really want my work to, I like that my work has waitresses and mechanics in it, but I also like that my work has teachers and lawyers in it. I want the full spectrum of Appalachia to be in my work. And it's just like, this book, like I said, it's an Appalachian family, but it's mostly set in Ireland. So, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an Appalachian novel. It's not about Appalachian issues, but I also think there's something to be said about Appalachians being out in the world and the way Appalachians see the world. So I think of it as a global Appalachia. One of my favorite lines in Appalachian literature is from the Bear Sermon by Jim Wayne Miller, which I think is, one of the masterpieces of Appalachian literature. And I probably won't get it exactly right, but it's, you don't have to only see ridge to ridge. You can see ocean to ocean. So in other words, you can be a local person and you can be a global person. And I think that's really important for young people to hear today, because it's sometimes you feel like as an Appalachian you have to make a choice that you can only focus on your holler You know, and I mean, I have students say to me all the time, I want to leave home, but I feel really guilty. And I tell them, you know, well, some people are meant to serve from home and some people are meant to serve from afar. I do feel like as an Appalachian, you do have a responsibility on you that other people don't have to serve your own people. But you don't have to do it from one particular place. There are lots of ways to serve your people and your place, you know. And so I hope that comes through in my work. I mean, one of my novels is that I'm really proud of that most of my adult readers haven't read, but it's probably my most read novel. It's the novel of mine that sold the most. It's called The Same Sun Here. And I wrote it with a woman named Neela Vaswani. And so it takes a little boy from eastern Kentucky, and he's pen pals with a little girl from India. And it's about them sort of teaching each other about their cultures and what's going on in their cultures, and them realizing that they're more alike than they're different, you know. And so I love that little book because it is read by people who wouldn't normally read a book about Appalachia. You know, lots of people who are reading it because one of the authors is South Asian. And so they're reading it, and they are encountering Appalachia, and then Appalachian kids are reading a South Asian author that they probably might not read because they're reading about Appalachia, you know. So I love the way that it's making Appalachia more global, even while it's local. Does that make sense? Couple more?
I'm curious about the title and the lead character's name.
Yeah.
If you had any particular inspiration or what brought about that title and that name.
Thank you. That's a good question. I was trying to think of names, you know, that sounded a little different because the book's set, you know, in the future. I didn't want it to be like a name that's real common right now, but I also didn't want it to be like a far-fetched name, you know. And I use music to guide me a lot, and so I really love this singer-songwriter named Josh Ritter. I think he's from Idaho, and he has a song called Lark, and I just have always loved that song, and so I named the character after that song. Well, then after I'd been writing the novel for a couple of years, I heard there's a song called The Lark Ascending, and if you've never heard it, when you go home, go to YouTube and just type in The Lark Ascending, and it'll come right up. It's a 14-minute, one-movement piece of classical music, and it's just the most beautiful piece of music I've ever heard. And the song it's an emotional journey. You go through every emotion while you're listening to it. And I thought that's the soundtrack for this book, because this book is a journey too. It's an Odyssey story. And so also The Lark Ascending is probably the most beloved piece of classical music in Ireland and the United Kingdom. And so I knew it would have that familiarity for a lot of people in the world. And also, my main character, Lark, is literally ascending. He's climbing a mountain for a lot of the book, you know. So it makes sense literally and metaphorically, and it gives it a soundtrack that I hope everybody will listen. I hope everybody will listen to that song. It's by Ralph Vaughan Williams, and he's the rare British composer who was raised working class, and you hear that in the music, I think, you know. And back to legacy, I think, you know, one of the most important parts of when I think about being multifaceted to me is being raised working class. Next month I'm doing a lecture in Buffalo, New York, and it's all about being raised in a trailer and how people respond to that. I don't meet a lot of people in the literary world or the academic world who were raised in a trailer, you know, and people sometimes don't know how to talk to me because of that. And they don't know how to react when I read them the riot act when they say the phrase trailer trash, you know, and I let them have it when they do that. And so anyway, Sorry, I go off topic, but I hope I answered that question. Do we have time for one more, Amy? Anybody else?
So where does the novel begin for you? With an image, with a title, with what, in general, how do you usually start a project? With an image or a title or what?
It's usually an idea. Like my novel Southernmost is about at its most basic, it's about a kidnapping. And so that was the first thing I thought, well, that'd be an interesting novel to write about, all the complications of a kidnapping, especially a custodial kidnapping. But I also had an image in mind of a riverbank that I kept thinking about. And so I wrote the whole novel, and you don't really get to that riverbank until the last page of the novel. And with Lark Ascending, I just kept thinking about that boy and the dog walking across an Irish landscape. So it was more of, I started with an image, and then I had to think, why are they walking? You know, what's going on there? And so one thing leads to another, and one answer leads to another question, and leads to another answer, and before you know it, you have an idea or a premise, you know. But usually an idea, like one sentence, like not even a sentence, like a kidnapping. Clay's Quilt started with a murder. And so once you read that book, you don't think a whole lot about it being about, it's not a murder mystery, anything like that, but it's about the way a murder, an act of violence reverberates across the whole family and changes everybody in the community and things like that.
Isn't he wonderful? Yes. So 2 things I'll say about the presentation. One, I really respect his call to all of us, I guess, as residents of this area, if you are a resident of this area, that you have, I guess, an individual responsibility to present sometimes the best of who we are, the real of who we are. And that's an enormous responsibility. So if we don't tell our story, someone else will tell our story. And wouldn't we rather be telling our story? Plus, I think we have enough going against us. We should be the best advocate of our area in all aspects of life. So I hope you take that away. And then second, the thing that I wrote down was that everybody needs a good dog in their life, right? If you don't have a dog, you need a good dog because it will take you through any problems that you have. I've got a good dog. I might start writing about him tonight. Who knows? So thank you, Silas. Thank you for your presentation today. And now we'll get on to one of the best parts of our festival is recognizing our writers who have submitted works. Like I said, we had a lot of entries this year. So take your accomplishment and realize that, you were chosen for a reason, and keep writing. So I'm going to introduce Tyler Hughes. He's a member of our Foundation Cultural and Humanities Committee. He's going to announce our short story contest winners today.
All right, thank you, Amy. And I'm going to go off script for just a second and say what an honor it is to be here today, and an honor to share the stage here with Silas. When I was in college, one of the first works of his that I read was Something's Rising that he wrote with Jason Howard. And in there's a chapter dedicated to people in Wise County who are fighting to stop a mountaintop removal site here in the county. And that just floored me when I read that as an 18, 19-year-old. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody wrote about people I know and people that I consider to be friends and family at home. And that had such an impact on me. And little did I know that Silas wouldn't just be my hero, but I get to call him a friend a few years later. And I want to say, particularly to the young people in the audience, that I hope you took inspiration today from his talk, and specifically thank you for that comment at the end about you don't just have to serve from far or serve from here close, you could serve your community anywhere. That means a lot to me specifically, and I hope other young people take that message to heart as well. So without further ado, though, we're going to announce the winners of the 36th annual Lonesome Pine Short Story Contest. So in the middle school category of the short story contest, our first place winner is Cheyenne Mullins, a student at J.W. Adams Combined School in Pound, Virginia, for her story titled, I Still Love You. Congratulations.
Some of our folks are here today and some are not.
Okay. In the high school category of the short story contest, our third place winner in the high school category is Keely Bailey, a student at Central High School in Wise, Virginia, for her story, Dr. Squiggles. Congratulations. Our second place winner in the high school category is Angelina Fitzgerald, a student at West Ridge High School in Blunteville, Tennessee, for her story, The Towers I Build. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today. So we'll move on to our first place winner in the high school category is Nina Fialova, a student at Central High School in Wise, for her story, The Cat's Key. Congratulations to all those winners. In the adult category of the short story contest, our third place winner in the adult category are Teresa Matney and Brian Shortridge of Oakwood, Virginia, for their story, Creamed Corn. Sometimes it's the title that pulls you in, and I can't wait to read Creamed Corn here in a little bit. Our second place winner in the adult category is Henry Samples of Johnson City, Tennessee, for his story, When We All Get to Heaven. Henry couldn't be with us today. Our first place winner in the adult category is Matthew Stanley for his story, The Living Water. Matthew also couldn't be with us today. Now I will switch roles here with Dr. Greer, and she will announce the winners of the poetry contest.
All right. I know our Ridgeview students, maybe they had planned to be here, and maybe some of them could make it, but, we've had some snow in the area, so unfortunately that delayed some of our school schedules. Our third place winner in the middle school category is Colton Rose, a student at Ridgeview Middle School. Colton is recognized for his work, Hold On. Okay. Our second place winner in the middle school category is Cadence Taylor, also of Ridgeview Middle School. Cadence is being recognized for her poem, Fear. And our first place winner in the middle school category is Ava Green. Ava is being recognized for her work titled The Girl I Am. Oh, yay! Ava is a middle school student, but she actually attends John I. Barton High School. Okay. In the high school category, our third place winner is Kathleen Schwartz of West Ridge High School in Blunteville. She is being recognized for her work titled Our Lives. Okay. Our second place winner in the high school category is Kyla Parsons, a student at John I. Burton High School. Kyla's with us today. Kyla is recognized for her work titled Fairy Tale. And our first place winner in the high school category is Lily Anna Dotson, a student at Central High School. Lily Anna is recognized for her work titled Borrowed. For our adult category in the poetry contest, our third place winner is Danita Ratliff Kennedy for her work titled The Maple Laughs in Gold. Yay. Our second place winner in the adult category is William Moore of Elizabethton, Tennessee, for his work, When a Red-Winged Blackbird Caught. And finally, our first place winner in the adult category is by Seth Grindstaff of Jonesboro, Tennessee, who I believe is also a teacher as well. Seth is being recognized for his work titled Resistance. So if you are a poetry or short story contest winner, I'm going to ask for you to gather outside near the fireplace, and we'll get a picture of you following the event. And please, let's give another round of applause for all of our winners and all of our entries this year. So I hope that you have enjoyed this year's author's presentation and the winning entries. If you have made a reservation for lunch at the Fox House and don't know how to get here, some of the ladies from our foundation are in the back and can give you directions. I'm sure that Mr. House is going to stay a little bit longer and speak with folks and sign books. There's books available for purchase by the Mountain Empire Community College Bookstore out front. And if you have enjoyed this program, and I hope you have, I hope that you will consider making a donation to the college's Cultural and Humanities Fund, which provides programming to include this festival, Mountain Music School, Home Craft Days, and other art events on campus. Please view our foundation at www.meccfoundation.org. And thanks, y'all, for coming. Love to have you. Love to see everyone in the crowd. Makes me very happy. Keep writing. Thank you.